indigenous communities have used two-spirit personas for the entirety of their culture, and so that leads me to my question. When you say that transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely, I ask you, Mr. Knowles, how can we eradicate something that has been here as long as humans have?
Well, yeah, there have been all sorts of crazy, terrible ideas for a very long time, too.
It's not that difficult. It doesn't need to be convoluted. It doesn't need to be controversial. A woman, to answer your question, is an adult.
Unraveling the complexities of woke culture. Woke culture has become a significant topic of discussion in today's society, often sparking heated debates and differing opinions. The concept challenges traditional understandings of identity, reality, and language, creating a landscape where feelings can sometimes take precedence over facts. We'll explore the various facets of woke culture, examining its implications on our understanding of gender identity and societal norms. Understanding woke culture. At its core, woke culture advocates for heightened awareness and sensitivity towards social injustices, particularly those affecting marginalized communities.
It's very new. It started with Simone de Beauvoir in 1948, and what you're discussing is the idea that actually came with Judith Butler. The first time there was this idea that there were more than two genders was John Money. I'm sure you're familiar with that case. That's very new. And there's no biological backing behind this theory. It is based on an emotive response. So I don't agree that gender and sex are separate. Legal documentation sometimes don't say they're separate. We're trying to adapt that now based on how people feel. And I don't think that we should adapt the law considering something an act of violence because someone uses a pronoun which is biologically correct because you consider it an act of violence against you.
What's a biological pronoun?
He, her, his, her.
How do we determine that?
Whether they're male or female.
Yeah, but how do we determine that's... What if we decided that she, her, hers was what we were going to use for males?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We right now, we have male and female,
now, so that's
his or her.
Current standard, right?
No, it's a biological standard.
The words that we use are based off of like what we as a society use, though.
Not
right?
entirely.
Yeah,
no, they're a reflection.
Linguistics is pretty societally based.
Okay.
I would say.
Amphibian.
What about amphibians?
Is that societally based?
Amphibian. An amphibian is I don't. You know what? I'm not a science major, but I will say an amphibian is a scientific classification of an
reptile.
Animal. Yeah, it's a classification of an animal species.
Bush, tree, blueberry.
Yeah. Okay.
Are these societal terms?
Point?
The point is that language is a reflection of standards that we have as a society. Are doctors sexist?
I think some doctors are sexist.
Are doctors transphobic if they refer to their patients who have a penis and they come in for a prostate exam as a male? Is that doctor hate speaking? Is that an act of aggression?
I think if that doctor misgenders their patient, then yeah, they are being transphobic.
Okay. Well, my mind has not changed, but I think I tried to find some common ground. I'm sorry that we didn't.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry that you feel that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madison.
I'm not going to shake your hand.
I figured.
However, the term has evolved and is often used pejoratively to describe what some perceive as excessive political correctness or an overemphasis on identity politics. The evolving concept of identity. One of the most contentious aspects of woke culture is its approach to identity. Activists argue that traditional definitions of gender and identity are outdated and insufficient. For instance, the concept of transgenderism has been a focal point, with arguments suggesting that it should be acknowledged as a legitimate identity, rather than something to be eradicated. Critics, however, question the validity of these identities, arguing that they often defy biological realities. For example, the assertion that a person can identify as a woman based purely on feelings rather than biological characteristics is seen as problematic by many.
I know that the people who push this stuff are incapable of being honest. I know that the DEI agenda would not exist but for all the lying. So asking them to not lie is, it goes against their nature. It's like asking a fish to climb a tree.
The language of inclusivity. Inclusive language has become a hallmark of woke culture, aiming to create a more accepting environment. Terms like pregnant people have replaced mothers to accommodate those who may not identify strictly as female. While some view this as a progressive step, others argue that it complicates language and undermines the clarity of communication. The intersection of science and ideology.
So this dichotomy is a false dichotomy that isn't supported by any of the medical associations that I just named off.
Then let me explain.
None of the medical associations that I just named off would actually support the idea that gender is biological. This is something that's completely untrue within every single medical consensus.
Well then,
I will just say that anyone who suggests that gender has no reference whatsoever to biology, it's not connected in any way to biology, is just full of shit. Because if the and the reason I and the reason that I say
then you actually just disagree with medical consensus within the Western
disagree. Yes, I disagree with the false medical consensus driven by politically driven quote unquote doctors. If any doctor denies to me that there is a dichotomy between male and female, a sexual dichotomy between male and female, they are ignorant and they are letting their politics get in the way of their science. Anybody who suggests to you that there is such a thing, for example, as a pregnant male is not a doctor, they are an activist.
I'm very glad that none of these opinions are actually accepted in academia and haven't been for over 70 years. Sent this here on Twitter.
Okay, so the notion that they haven't been accepted for over 70 years is a bizarre one, considering they were accepted until about 5 minutes ago. And the basic idea that male and female do not exist runs counter to all mammalian biology, all of it, not just human. Are we to suggest that gender and sex are different in walruses? How does this work exactly? Like, are they different in bears? Anytime you have all mammalian reproduction is rooted in the idea that there's a sexual dichotomy between male and female. To obscure that with all sorts of semantic word games about how you feel subjectively has no bearing on whether male and female are categories that exist. And if you're trying to define male and female with reference to any subjective category that cannot be identified by any metric whatsoever other than how you feel today, I challenge whether that is scientific or whether that is merely a self-perception that is being guided by a political agenda.
As discussions around gender identity evolve, the intersection of science and ideology becomes increasingly critical. Many proponents of woke culture assert that gender is a social construct, separate from biological sex. This perspective raises questions about the role of science in understanding gender, biological differences, and athletic competition. One area where this debate plays out is in sports. The inclusion of transgender women in women's sports has sparked controversies regarding fairness and competition. Critics argue that biological differences give transgender women an unfair advantage, while supporters claim that inclusivity should take precedence. For instance, discussions around athletes like Leah Thomas, a transgender woman who competed in women's swimming, have highlighted the complexities of balancing inclusivity with a level playing field. The scientific basis for determining fairness in sports remains a contentious issue. Redefining reality, the impact on society. Woke culture's insistence on redefining reality has broader implications for society. As traditional norms are challenged, many are left questioning the very foundations of language and identity. This has led to a pushback against what some perceive as a culture of lies, where individuals must conform to ideologies that clash with their beliefs. The pressure to conform. In corporate environments, the pressure to adopt woke language and attitudes can lead to a culture of fear and dishonesty. Employees may feel compelled to present themselves in ways that align with woke ideals, even if they personally disagree. This phenomenon raises concerns about authenticity and the psychological impact of living a lie. Moreover, this pressure is not limited to the workplace. It spills into educational institutions and social settings, where individuals may face backlash for expressing dissenting opinions. The erosion of open dialogue in favor of ideological conformity can stifle genuine discussion and understanding. The role of personal responsibility. Another critical aspect of the conversation around woke culture is the concept of personal responsibility. Critics argue that the emphasis on societal structures and systemic oppression diminishes individual agency. When people's successes or failures are attributed solely to external factors, it can lead to a sense of helplessness and a lack of motivation to strive for personal improvement.
And there are also other genetic disorders where people are born with XXY, XY, or just X or just Y and such. And while it may seem rare, there are hundreds of thousands of people born with this each year. And so going off of your fairy tale hybrid people, they do exist. And so I'm just wondering how that would play into your view of there being a spectrum of gender, because
These are people who can get pregnant and also impregnate someone else?
Yes. Hermaphrodites, they have both ovaries and testes.
No. If such a person existed, that would certainly, I would not include that part in my next speech. But such a person does not exist. Now, intersex and now the genetic deformities you're talking about obviously do exist, and I expected someone to bring that up in the Q&A. I think it's a fine point to bring up. Two things I would say to that. Number one, that actually has nothing to do with transgenderism, because when when we talk about transgender, we're talking specifically about intersex people, then we would just say intersex. But with transgender, most of the time, we're talking about men who, they don't have any deformity. They are just straight up men, clearly, and they are identifying as a woman. So even if I agreed that what you're talking about is some sort of exception, that actually would have nothing to do with the transgender topic. But I don't think it is an exception because, as I said, I think a true a true resident of the middle circle of the Venn diagram would be someone who has the reproductive capabilities of both genders. And no one like that exists. I mean, not to be crude, but there isn't anyone who can get themselves pregnant, right? And that doesn't exist in the human kingdom anyway. So I don't think, I think what you're talking about there are people who have deformities, and so in their case, it would be more difficult than usual to determine what their actual biological sex is, because the usual indicators aren't there or aren't as obvious, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a biological sex. It's just not as clear.
Identity as performance. The notion that identity can be performed rather than inherently defined raises questions about authenticity. If individuals can simply adopt identities based on their appearance or behavior, does that undermine the significance of those identities? This perspective suggests that identity has become commodified, reduced to mere performance rather than rooted in genuine experience. The dangers of subjective truth. The rise of subjective truth has become a hallmark of woke culture, where personal experiences are often prioritized over objective facts. This trend can lead to a distortion of reality, where narratives take precedence over evidence. As a result, discussions about complex issues become oversimplified, reducing nuanced debates to binary arguments. Consequences for mental health. Additionally, the focus on subjective truths can exacerbate mental health issues. Many individuals who identify with marginalized groups may feel pressure to conform to narratives that do not align with their experiences. This dissonance can lead to increased anxiety and depression as people grapple with the expectations placed upon them by society. Conclusion: navigating woke culture. Woke culture presents a complex landscape filled with both opportunities for progress and challenges to traditional norms. As society grapples with these changes, it is essential to foster open dialogue and critical thinking. By engaging in thoughtful discussions, we can navigate the intricacies of identity, language, and truth without losing sight of the values that underpin our shared humanity. Ultimately, the conversation around woke culture is far from over. As we continue to explore these themes, it is crucial to approach them with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to truth. The future of our society depends on our ability to balance the evolving definitions of identity with the realities of our shared existence.
So the idea that suicidality is directly a result of people like me saying, no, men are not women and women are not men, it's not true. It's also...
So you think it doesn't impact their identity at all, or their depression, or how they feel about themselves?
I think the idea that you're going to sacrifice the entire society's proper definition of sex because you think that there is in legal terms, somebody with an eggshell skull, meaning that somebody who has a pre-existing condition that makes them more susceptible to criticism, that is not a way to run a society. You can't sacrifice truth because some people are going to actually suffer because of the truth. Plus, there's no evidence whatsoever that the suicide rate would go down in the transgender community in any marked way if people just started pretending that men were women and women were men. We're trying that experiment now. We'll find out whether it works.